Hello, I'm a monster.
Do you have to say that every time you appear?
Yes, it's in the contract. Anyway, I'm here to give you your next assignment.
You're not going to ask me to review an entire genre again, are you? I barely survived that hockey saga.
No. This week you get something simple. It's just one game.
Oh, cool. What is it?
Pleiades.
What are these?
Pleiades, the arcade classic from Tekken.
Tekken is a game, not an arcade manufacturer.
Not Tekken, Tekken. They became Tecmo. But before they did that, they made Pleiades. Now go and review it.
All right. Oh, here we go, guys, here we go. So, Pleiades, it's one of those Space Invaders clones from the early arcade era that cunningly managed to bypass the complete cultural zeitgeist of the time and therefore not show up on home computers because of a very effective marketing technique. It launched in 1981, the year before the Commodore 64 and the ZX Spectrum even hit the market. That means that by the time those computers had a foothold on the home computer market, this game had completely bypassed everyone's memory. Games like Galaga, which were released in the same year, managed to push Pleiades out of the limelight, ensuring that the game didn't last long enough on the arcade floor to let people remember it well enough to want a home version. I would honestly not have known about this game if it wasn't for the fact that it's on Tecmo Classic Arcade for the original Xbox. Xbox exclusive as well, so even fewer people managed to actually see this game. So, is this going to mean that it's one of those hidden gems that absolutely has to be played on this game that has to be tracked down because you must see it? Or is it one of those early coin guzzlers that was pretty good but not good enough and whose arcade cabinet could be repurposed for some other game that was more profitable, a bit like Black Widow could? There's only one way to find out. We have to load up and play this game. So let's boot up the old Xbox and give Pleiades a try. Well, that's a great start, isn't it? The game's name is misspelled on its own title screen. It's supposed to have two E's in it, like the mythical Greek heroine Pleiades. Not that ancient Greece actually has anything to do with this game, mind you, because this is a static space shooter. No ancient Greek heroes, gods or villains or anything like that have anything to do with any part of this game. The game is split into 4 stages, each of which has a different style to it, like Golf, which also came out in 1981 and which also managed to overshadow this game. In the first stage, you fire up the screen at enemies that will come down in waves and attempt to swarm you. The enemies can fire 3 rockets at a time, while you can only fire 1 laser beam at a time. So it's really fair. You have a small refuge area down on the left-hand side, similar to the barriers in Space Invaders, but the enemies can also construct a barrier if you let them get to the bottom of the screen, so it's in your best interests to shoot them before they can get down there and do that. So far, it all sounds pretty straightforward, but there is a definite strategy to the game. If you want to win at this, you have to be aware of what's going to go on. When you get too close to an enemy, it will start spamming rockets down at you. Since the enemies can move in formation, and usually will unless you've shot them, this will cause a section of the screen to essentially be filled with rockets, practically guaranteeing that you will die. To prevent this, you've got to learn the timings. Notice how quickly the enemy moves compared to how quickly your laser moves. When you've got that worked out, you can time a laser blast to hit an enemy as it moves into range, letting you stay safely on another part of the screen and avoiding the rocket spam. Once you've got that worked out, you can defeat the enemies with relative ease and progress on to the next stage. The second stage will be one that fans of Golf, Galaxians and any number of similar games will be very familiar with. Enemies fly down the screen in waves, moving randomly. Your goal is to kill them all. Sounds easy? It's not quite as easy as it first seems. As the enemies move down the screen, some of them will become larger. These larger enemies require 3 shots to destroy. 1 to the left wing, 1 to the right wing. You can do those in any order. But when those are hit, the middle opens up and a final shot to the centre will finish that enemy off. The larger enemies are also faster and are far more likely to target you as they move, so your best bet is to shoot as many of them as possible when they're still small, because the last thing you need is for the screen to be filled with a swarm of large enemies that are way harder to deal with. Once that's done, you get to the third screen. Now this feels an awful lot like the final screen of Golf. You have to defeat an enemy space station, which requires a lot of hits to its main hull, plus the destruction of all its weapons. The space station is protected by several waves of enemies, which you will need to deal with if you're going to get a clear shot on the station without being destroyed by enemy fire. The best trick is to spam the station with repeated shots until the enemies appear, then to deal with the enemies so that you can get back to fighting the station. Rinse and repeat until it's destroyed. So far, so standard early 80s shooter, right? Well, it's not a bad game, I have to admit, but it really hasn't changed anything that we've seen before, has it? So let's get ready for the final stage, because that is a surprise. In the fourth and final stage, you've been called back to Earth via an emergency broadcast. You need to get there quickly, but there are derelict enemy ships in the way, so you're going to have to dodge and weave through them. You can still shoot, but you won't have time to destroy anything. And to be honest with you, I'm not entirely sure that you can destroy anything on this stage. They certainly aren't one-hit kills if you can do it. The controls are fairly sluggish. There's a lot of momentum to your ship, and while the course looks simple enough when you're watching it, it's a lot harder to actually bob and weave through than you would expect. If you get the chance, you can pick up flags on your journey. These give you bonus points, which is nice because that is essentially what you're playing for. It's an early 80s shooting game. What you're playing for is the high score. Once you get back to Earth, that's it. When you make it back to Earth, the stages just repeat, and you get to play the whole game all over again. So as you can see, Pleiades is actually a decent enough early 80s space shooter. It doesn't exactly bring a huge amount to the table, save for that final stage, which I have to admit I was very surprised at and actually quite enjoyed seeing. And let's face it also, most players aren't going to see that, because the first few levels, they're tricky. Not massively hard, but tricky. But as games go, it's fun enough, and I have actually enjoyed playing it. But if it wasn't included, let's put it this way, if it wasn't included on the Tecmo Classics arcade system, I don't think I'd be all that fussed to have missed out on this. We've seen a lot of what it has before, and it's always been done better. Aside from that final level, which was a nice novelty, most of what we've seen in this game has been done before and better in Golf, Galaxians, and any game like that. If you see this game around, it's worth a few plays. I certainly enjoyed playing it, and I think it has got something interesting to it. That fourth level, that was quite nice. It brought an interesting different challenge to the game, and I wasn't expecting it, so that was good. But for the rest of it, a lot of this has been done before and done better. So it's not one I would recommend you hunt down above all others, but when you see it, give it a shot. Anyway, that's really all we've got time for this week, so thank you so much for joining me. Until next time, I've been Zoe Kirk Robinson, you've been watching GameHammer. Please do remember to like, comment, subscribe, and do all those things that YouTube requires in order to not get buried by the algorithm. And I'll see you next time. Happy gaming! If you like the show, please consider supporting me on Patreon. It really does help create future videos. That's patreon.com/Zoe Kirk Robinson. And I've got an extra special thanks going out to Chief89, Sam Yates, Retro Mickey 82, Mo Henry, and George Botterini. Thank you so much, guys.